The scandalous making of a controversial 60s sex symbol. Before making this video, I wasn't really sure whether to refer to Brigitte Bardot as an icon given her controversy, considering how this may rub people the wrong way and give the perception that I'm extending Brigitte's sympathy and empathy, of which she is wholly undeserving of, but decided in the end that Brigitte is an icon, a fashion icon, a screen legend, a French siren, the ultimate 50s, 60s and 70s sex symbol. Brigitte is all of these things, yet they don't preclude her from criticism. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. She's both the former face of French cinema and the current face of bigotry, gaining notoriety for her views on Islam, the LGBT community, and the #MeToo movement. I say this because often when people are discussing Brigitte's outrageous views, they seem to want to divorce her from her former face, her as a screen goddess, and tend to bring up her current looks and quote bad aging, as if that has some bearing on her inciting racial hatred. This also isn't meant as a harsh knock, as I know a lot of people seem to do this, but jumping to criticise her aging alongside her views doesn't really make a point or strengthen an argument. Whilst it may seem interesting and somewhat baffling to some for a society which witch hunts and claims to hold celebrities accountable, to continue hailing a blatantly bigoted Brigitte, famed for portraying sexually emancipated characters, I think this can be partially explained by people, particularly a non-French audience, simply being unaware of Brigitte's opinions and wanting to steal her style. After all, Monica Bellucci is amongst celebs like Tilda Swinton and Wes Anderson, who signed the Polanski petition. So why discuss Brigitte? For one, I haven't really seen many videos on Brigitte, let alone a deep dive into her story. 2, this is a perfect opportunity to educate about the many controversies of Miss Bardot, particularly following on from my Jane Birkin video, who was in many ways Britain's answer to Brigitte Bardot and arguably her foil, which acts as a first instalment. And lastly, Brigitte is obviously quite the character, so I thought she'd make for interesting discussion. When filming Don Juan with Brigitte, Jane complimented Bardot's beauty. In response, the French legend told Jane she had by far the nicer nose. Birkin remarked, as far as noses goes, she had nothing on Brigitte. Brigitte, possessing her usual childlike insouciance, self-confidence and swagger, with a grin replied, "Now you mention it, mine is much prettier." Ironically, Jane's insecurity and her self-effacement would ensure her legacy remained intact, long after Brigitte began banging the drum for the National Front, and living on in death as the epitome of 60s sexy chic, and for fashion connoisseurs as the Hermès Birkin bag. The same can't exactly be said for the Parisian-born and bred animal rights activist, former actress, singer and model, who did away a lot of that goodwill when she started using her fervent animal rights campaigning as a springboard to air her racist opinions, which the French government itself has fined Brigitte 6 times for now. Childhood. Brigitte Anne-Marie Bardot, often referred to by her initials BB, was born the 28th of September 1934 in Paris to Louis Bardot, an engineer and proprietor of several industrial factories, and Anne-Marie Musel, the daughter of an insurance company director. But more importantly, her upper-middle-class parents were bohemians at heart. Her father interested in poetry, photography and amateur filmmaking with contacts in the film industry. Her mother, a beautiful society woman, keen on fashion and ballet, with many contacts in these respective industries. In 1938, Bardot's younger sister, Marie-Jeanne, affectionately known as Mijanou, a French actress and writer herself, was born. Her parents treated the sisters strictly, taught them manners, supervised their education, refused to let them stay out late, dictated what they wore each day, scrutinized their friends, and gave them lashings, but this was more common at the time. As such, in this period, a quiet Brigitte only had one real friend, Chantal, as her parents would always ask the occupations of the other girls' fathers, deeming them unsuitable. It was said her parents also killed Brigitte's beloved rabbit, which also likely played a role in her transformation into an animal rights activist. Though these trials and tribulations were no doubt exacerbated by wartime in occupied Paris, and throughout her writings, Bardot speaks fondly of her family, especially devastated by the death of her mother. The Bardot family was a tight-knit family, evidenced through the use of childish nicknames for each other. Her father was Pilou, mother was Toti, Brigitte was Bri-Bri, and Marie-Jeanne was Mijanou. Brigitte's father charted how his cute blonde baby, Brigitte, became an adorable little girl who thought she was ugly mostly because she wore for a while little round, thick-rimmed glasses due to amblyopia, or lazy eye, and then blossomed into a gorgeous adolescent and graceful ballet dancer. Unlike other screen goddesses of the time, Brigitte Bardot was not a working class lass. Rather, she came from a very pious, conservative, Catholic and bourgeoisie family. Brigitte grew up in the Avenue de la Boulonnais of Paris's classy 8th arrondissement, not too far from the Eiffel Tower, and later moved to, depending on the source, either a 7 or 9 bedroom apartment in the swanky Rue de la Pompe in the plush 16th arrondissement of Paris. The apartment move meant Brigitte, aged 7, was sent to a new private school, Cours Hattemer, where she only needed to attend 3 days of the week, making up the rest with homework, meaning the young girl could devote her time to something she loved far more than school, dancing. The family also had a weekend cottage in Louveciennes, west of Paris. The family favoured fashionable holiday destinations, spending their summers in Megève in the Alps in the winter and the resorts of La Baule in the Atlantic coast and Saint-Tropez on the Mediterranean in the summer. Although Saint-Tropez later became world famous because of Brigitte and her sex kitten defining role and God-created woman, Brigitte's mother already had a house there, frequented by writers and artists. Adolescence. Young Bardot was originally destined to be a ballerina, having studied ballet for 3 years from the age of 13 at the prestigious Paris Conservatory, developing an elegant poise and gait which would soon fascinate the world. Brigitte's ballet training was valuable to her. Like Audrey Hepburn, ballet gave Brigitte a distinctive, graceful posture and walk. She was gifted, one of famous ballet master Boris Nyassev's best pupils, winning a prize at the Paris Conservatoire in 1948. That same year, Madame Bardot helped get her daughter into modelling, convincing her friend Jean Barnett, a famous hat designer, to employ the then 14-year-old to model his hats whilst dancing to music from Swan Lake. Barnett's show led to more opportunities, photo assignments for traditional women's magazines, but later the more modern and influential magazine Elle, which published its first issue in only 1945. Bardot's father was reportedly an opponent to this type of career, but eventually agreed to the fad. When Brigitte began modelling, Christian Dior's new look, launched in 1947, dominated French couture and fashion, glamorous and feminine, but in a formal and structured way. Women like Brigitte's mother and her mother's friends wore ensembles with tailored jackets, full or long, fitted skirts, and evening gowns in expensive silks or satins. Hair was often worn short and wavy. Their clothes had to be carefully matched by hats, bags, and high-heeled shoes. But soon, Brigitte would help change all of this. Although Bardot herself would start out modelling clothes that were initially a younger version of these outfits. Clothes of the prim and proper teenage girl, the jeune fille. At the age of 15, Brigitte first appeared on the cover of Elle on the May 2nd, 1949 issue. Bardot was perfect for modelling, uniquely pretty with large eyes, a short nose, pillowy pout, and long luxuriant hair. She was also tall-ish and lithe, reportedly measuring in at 5'5" to 5'6". Compared to her rivals of the time, such as Marilyn Monroe or Elizabeth Taylor, she also never experienced weight problems. Roger Vadim. Vadim was a half-French descendant of a Russian aristocratic family, called the Plemianikov, who left the country amidst the October Revolution. In France, Vadim's father, Igor, held the position of consul, but following his early death, a heart attack at 34, witnessed by his 9-year-old son, the family found itself in financial difficulty. Reduced to poverty, his mother, Marie Antoinette, took a job as manager of a hostel in the French Alps during the Second World War. After the Allied forces liberated Paris, the family returned to Paris, where Vadim would attend the Theatre Sarah Bernhardt. There he would meet and become assistant to then-famous director Marc Allégret. Under the gloss, Roger was a speedster without a pretty penny or permanent home, belonging to a small circle of French bohemian existentialists. One day, Roger would dine sumptuously with the creme de la creme, the cream of the crop of Parisian society, and the next day, he would have nowhere to sleep and nothing to eat. The veritable opposite of Roger, Brigitte came from a traditional wealthy bourgeoisie family. Her conservative parents would take precious care of their daughter's education, manners, and carefully introduced her to various wealthy, influential bachelors and potential candidates for son-in-law. From early childhood, Bardot's parents forcefully instilled her religious practices and rules of impeccable behaviour. So how did Brigitte and Roger meet? On accident, like everyone else. The story of their first meeting, like all legends, has been told many times, but like all tales, remains vague. Depending on the version, either Marc, his producer, Pierre Braunberger, or Vadim himself, then an early 20-something-year-old assistant, and imitating the work of a screenwriter, wanted to meet a young Brigitte smiling on the May 1950 Elle issue. The legend goes that whilst living with and babysitting for an acting couple, their 3-year-old son wanted his sitter Vadim to make him a paper aeroplane. Vadim grabbed the latest issue of Elle, ripping out a page, encountering Brigitte's photo, staring raptly at it. It was said Bardot, I believe to be 15, not yet 16 as some sources claim, at the time and still a brunette, was accompanied by her suspicious mother, who was quickly charmed and reassured by director Marc. The meeting was an audition, a screen test for the next project, based on a script, The Laurels Are Cut, written by Roger, who was sent to contact Bardot. Brigitte didn't get the part, and the film was never made, but the fateful encounter would have far-reaching consequences for all concerned, especially for Vadim and Bardot on both professional and personal levels. Perhaps it was Marc, a man who clearly belonged to Madame Bardot's world and his elegant apartment near the Champs-Élysées, that blinded her to Brigitte and Roger falling for each other on the spot. Roger adored the ingenue's pert confidence and youthful sexual magnetism, and one look at the mysterious and handsome young man was enough for the young, overly controlled girl who dreamed of a great love to fall in love. Vadim was far removed from everything Brigitte knew. She who hated the rigours of an orderly life her demanding parents subjected her to, was awestruck by Vadim's embodiment of unfettered freedom, his slightly louche, bohemian aura, and the glamour of the film world. Compared to the country club offspring, medical or law students with whom she went on arranged dates with, he made on her the impression of a wild wolf. She wrote, "He looked at me, scared me, attracted me. I didn't know where I was anymore." He appeared by comparison to her, mature and sophisticated. She resolved that this was what she wanted. They bonded, developing great passion and deep affection, when the pair were not yet dreaming of great fame. An up-and-coming assistant to a great French director, and a schoolgirl who ended up on the cover of Elle by accident. Brigitte met with Roger to practice her acting skills, and he began frequenting her home where Mr. and Mrs. Bardot, who I'm assuming were unaware they were dating at the time, received him kindly but reportedly had servants discreetly count silver, suspecting him of theft. Either that or they were not yet dating. Brigitte recalled on one such occasion, "I remember the contrast between this bourgeoisie, luxurious dinner, with a butler, candles and silverware, and the presence of Vadim in a worn turtleneck and long hair. He looked like a gypsy, and I was crazy about it." Vadim soon introduced Bardot to his friends in the media, like famed author Colette, to books like Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, and to the act itself. Brigitte later reflected, "I'm a girl from a good family, who was very well brought up. One day I turned my back on it all and became a bohemian." Initially, Vadim had no intention of getting involved in a relationship with an inexperienced schoolgirl, but passion broke out between them when Brigitte changed her route and went to the premises of where he was staying. That day, the two became lovers, and started seeing each other in secret. Brigitte, constantly watched over by her parents, came up with 1,000 excuses to spend just a few moments more with Vadim. An article reports that on one occasion, the undressed couple quickly hid behind the curtain in the living room, dressing in a hurry when Mr. and Mrs. Bardot returned home early. Another occasion, Vadim rented a room in the same hotel when Brigitte and her family went away on a winter holiday, visiting her at night. Brigitte's father apparently heard disturbing footsteps on the creaking floor, rushing unexpectedly into his daughter's room. In response, the naked lovers dove into the snow from the window. The details are again hazy on how exactly Brigitte's parents discovered the affair, but it is known that the discovery of their relationship was much disapproved by her parents, who threatened to send her away to an all-girls boarding school in England. After all, they were a class of which had standards, relics of social immobility which survives in modern-day France. Roger Vadim was hardly husband material. Her parents relented only when the distraught girl tried, for the first but not the last time, to bargain for her life, sticking her head in the oven when the family went out to the theatre. Fortunately, the performance was cancelled and the parents found an unconscious Brigitte in the kitchen. The Bardots permitted their union after the incident, but decreed that Brigitte could not be married until 18, hoping by then the stupid idea would have blown out of her head. Brigitte and Roger had no plans to split up, however. Bardot began playing small roles. Although insignificant, she had become increasingly recognisable and frequently appeared on the cover of coloured magazines. Vadim, on the other hand, had to meet two of the Bardot family's conditions in order to marry Brigitte: find a steady job and become acquainted with teachings of Catholicism, attending long catechism classes. Madly in love with Brigitte, he became a journalist for the prestigious Paris Match newspaper and learned catechism by heart. And although Roger doesn't mention this in his memoirs, Bardot wrote in her diary, revealed by her 1996 autobiography Initials BB, that during their engagement she became pregnant. The first of allegedly 3 times, secretly removing Vadim's in a Swiss clinic, and the second in an almost fatal attempt somewhere in France, according to The Independent. Her parents, unaware at the time, were certain she had undergone jaundice. The experience led to recurrent hemorrhages, requiring further surgery. Motherhood terrified Brigitte, fearing it would take away her independence, youth, and destroy her fledgling career. In December 1952, Brigitte broke ranks when she finally married the rakish Vadim, at a Catholic church not too far from her Parisian home. An ultra-traditional ceremony, a proper church wedding, ironically setting her free and marking her passage from childhood to adulthood, walking into the world of cinema and world fame. At the wedding, Bardot was every bit the demure bride, wrapped in a beautiful classic white velvet dress with a mao collar, fitted bust, and long straight skirt, draped with fabric around her hips. This was more or less the last time she would be seen dressed so conservatively. And God created woman. In the mid-50s, Brigitte continued making relatively unnoticed films, but in 1956, Vadim would help mythologize Brigitte and himself become a successful but not great director during the flowering of French cinema. A blossoming Bardot would quickly abandon her dream of being a ballerina. The vehicle to international success, the risque and God-created woman, cast Brigitte, then 18, as Juliet, allowing her to show off her mythical sex appeal, creating a new type of heroine. The prudish girl, freed from the power of social conventions, courageous enough to reach for her own happiness, including sensual pleasure. Vadim said about Bardot, "She doesn't act, she exists." Her sex kitten role became an instant and defining moment in the history of cinema, scandalizing America, provoking outrage on a continental scale, boomeranging back to Europe, and enchanting the world. In the famous film scene, she dances, her skin glowing with sweat, her hair wild and loose. The film was banned in some states. Newspapers denounced the depravity of it all, but when they saw Brigitte's pearls of sweat, American men went wild. Although morality leagues advocated ban Bardot as if she were an illegal drug, Brigitte helped to really solidify how French girl like no other. In her private life, Bardot behaved just like a man, without restraint, alien to convention. She was no wife and no mother. She was no rebel, just herself. Such behaviour in the 1950s was scandalous, but a secret aspiration for many women: absolute freedom. The film let the duo conquer new cinematic heights, but when they finally reached them, they were already different people. Vadim had already threatened divorce when Brigitte, tired of household chores, moved into a hotel where she had been romanced by budding actors. Passion began to die out for the couple. Bardot commented that the intimacy of the relationship resembled one of brother and sister, and Vadim said, "Sleeping with Brigitte didn't particularly excite me anymore. Suddenly, I understood what it means to fulfill marital obligations." The cooling over excitement on my part was difficult to explain given the fact that Brigitte had reached full bloom of her beauty at the age of 21. Any man would sell his soul to the devil to be able to take my place in her bed. Brigitte was difficult to please, but Roger admits he had a problem with Brigitte's career. The gulf between them was growing. Brigitte's career was accelerating with incredible speed, whilst his was stagnating. When Bardot showed up in Cannes in 1953, even before her breakout role, to accompany Vadim, absolutely not as the star, the journalists went crazy about her. It was then that Roger first caught on to the emerging Bardot phenomenon. Wasp-thin yet curvaceous, the Bardot phenomenon took the world by storm. Bardot popularized her iconic poofy, teased peroxide blonde hair and signature bold eyeliner, becoming all the rage during her heyday. A mix of classic French chic with a bohemian flair, Bardot's choices were considered daring for the time. She had a major impact on what French people wore, often photographed in bright colours, off-the-shoulder tops, short skirts, tight-fitting pants, and known for incorporating leopard prints, which became a 60s trend. While working on the film, Brigitte fell in love with Jean-Louis Trintignant, the real threat that spelled the end of their union. Realising it was serious, Vadim let Bardot officially live with her lover, watching through the camera as their love scenes played out right in front of him. Perhaps in shock, Vadim claimed he didn't feel a shadow of jealousy, simply resigning to the end of love. Brigitte claims that if he had been jealous, their relationship could have been different. After all, Jean-Louis, in the first instance, was merely a prop to provoke her husband to show her some affection. One evening in Paris, Roger went to their apartment, where Brigitte, still officially his wife, came out laughing, taking hold of Jean-Louis' hand. Vadim returned home to write 2 letters, one to Brigitte and another to a friend. The contents of the letter remain unknown, but it is speculated to contain plans to end his life. After a frantic rally in the rain, Vadim changed his mind, going to his mother's. Years later, he reflects that the experience caused him to never again allow this unknown demon to take possession. In 1957, the couple officially divorced, parting in friendship. According to the biography Brigitte Bardot, The Life, the Legend, the Movies, sex kitten Brigitte had cheated on her co-star Jean-Louis, citing his frequent military service as the reason. The pair lived together 2 years before they broke up. During this period, Bardot followed up her performance as Juliet with the comedy La Parisienne in 1957, reuniting with Vadim in another melodrama in 1958, and that same year played a seductive criminal in Case of Adversity, the 13th most seen film in France that year. 1958 was also the year that Bardot became the highest paid actress in her home country. Following a rumoured nervous breakdown following the end of her relationship with Jean-Louis, in which she supposedly tried to overdose, Brigitte within weeks had moved on. The second marriage. Her next significant relationship was with her second husband, Jacques Charrier, who she accused of being physically abusive. Jacques was again co-star to Brigitte in the huge 1959 hit Babette Goes to War, the 4th biggest film in France that year. Shortly after, the 25-year-old starlet fell pregnant once again with what she describes as a cancerous tumour. Brigitte immediately sought to perform a termination, but this time no backroom doctor would dare to do, at the time, such a dangerous procedure on someone as famous as she. As France's highest paid actress, the sums she was earning were a fabulous help, buying her Paris flat, country houses, her own cars, a Morgan and a sequence of Rolls Royces, but in the end her fame was a drawback. In a desperate attempt, Bardot punched herself repeatedly in the stomach and sought alternatives from a doctor, preferring to, quote, give birth to a little dog. Her biography paints a picture of great desperation. Bardot wrote, "I'm not made to be a mother. I'm not adult enough. I know it's horrible to have to admit that, but I'm not adult enough to take care of a child." Charrier, hoping that Brigitte's maternal instincts would kick in, forbade her from continuing acting, and invoking his legal rights to prevent her from going to a hairdresser, convinced her to marry him and go through with her unwanted pregnancy. On June 18th, 1959, Charrier succeeded and they married as Brigitte hated the idea of bearing an illegitimate child. She continued, "I wanted to free myself. I was a prisoner of my too famous name and possessive nature of Jacques, a prisoner of my body, my face, my child." The last months of Brigitte's pregnancy were a nightmare. Photographers descended on her house, which stopped Brigitte from going out completely. France's most famed actress was so afraid she decided to give birth in the apartment instead. So on January the 11th, 1960, their son named Nicholas was born. Was this the magical moment that her husband hoped for, the moment where she first saw her son? "I screamed," she described, refusing to breastfeed her baby, begging them to take him away from me. "I never wanted to see him again." Reporters besieged her home in hopes of photographing the new mother and her baby. A day after Nicholas's birth, the photo shoot happened. A series of photos taken by a longtime family friend, which would later be published by tabloids. Indeed, an actress the motherly love Jacques had hoped for finally showed up, but only in photos. Brigitte feared that everyone would see her as a mum, thereby losing her charm amongst the male population. But that same year, the 1960 courtroom drama The Truth was Bardot's biggest commercial success in France and the third hit that year. Soon, Brigitte had gone with actor Sami Frey. When her husband caught wind of this, after 3 years of marriage, the pair divorced. He retained custody rights of Nicholas, who was raised by his paternal grandparents. Nicholas's relationship with his mother remained distant. At 12, when Nicholas came to stay, Bardot returned him to her ex, explaining she had a social event that evening. Nicholas did not wish to see his mother for several years thereafter. When Nicholas was fully grown, Brigitte tried to repair their relationship, to no avail. In 1984, Brigitte was not invited to her son's wedding, which she admits upset her a lot. Still undesirable to Nicholas, Brigitte didn't even get to meet her first granddaughter. Only 2 years after the birth of his second daughter, Brigitte went to meet her son in Norway, intending for a close relationship, but instead forced to accept a cold truce. In 1997, their relationship, holding by a thin thread, was practically severed when Brigitte published her memoirs. A new family scandal erupted. Her ex-husband and son sued Brigitte for revealing family secrets and insulting their feelings, in which a court ordered her to pay a fine of 250,000 francs. Jacques, her former husband, took his revenge by writing his own account of their brief marriage, which made Bardot allegedly hysterical when she saw the book displayed in a shop she frequented, demanding the copies be removed. Jacques said this about the book: "I'm giving my version of the facts." The reality of her love for Nicholas, confirmed by letters I kept, is much more to her credit than the horrors she wrote. When her son was asked by reporters why he isn't on good terms with his mother, he replied, "She loves her fur coats and I love my family." In the mid-60s, following her divorce from Jacques, Bardot began making films seemingly geared towards an international market. She starred in films like Contempt in 1963 and made a relatively brief appearance in her first Hollywood film, Dear Brigitte, in 1965, about an academic whose son develops a crush on her. Dear Brigitte wasn't a big success, but Viva Maria was a big hit in the national and international scene, but did not achieve breakthrough in the US as had been hoped. Then came Brigitte's outright flop in many years, 2 weeks in September. In 1966, Gunter Sachs met Bardot, becoming her third husband, just 2 months after they met. I covered this in more detail in the Jane Birkin video, so I won't be going over this in that level again. Long story short, the pair got married pretty quickly after Gunter began romancing Brigitte. This included gifting her £30,000 relatively quickly, taking her to Monte Carlo, sending and also scattering from a helicopter 100 red roses over her mansion garden, then jumping out of his helicopter to announce he was staying, and finally gifting her a pet cheetah given her love for animals. Gunter Sachs was truly the ultimate playboy. However, their relationship quickly went downhill following their Las Vegas wedding. Brigitte longed for quiet intimacy whilst Sachs enjoyed the extravagant circus of being married to the world's greatest sex symbol. And after their Tahiti honeymoon, the couple began realizing their mismatch on return to Paris. Neither party was fully committed to the relationship, which ultimately led Bardot to stray from the marriage. Bardot agreed to a date with Serge Gainsbourg, who failed to impress. Giving him a second chance, the sultry blonde phoned Gainsbourg, insisting he writes her the most beautiful love song ever heard as an apology for his poor performance on the date. The next morning, 2 songs, including the infamous Bonnie and Clyde, would be written. Suitably impressed with his apology songs, Bardot would succumb to Gainsbourg's advances, striking up a short yet passionate affair. But their secret relationship would only last 3 months before being discovered by Gunter, who issued a him or me ultimatum. Bardot chose Gunter, but fed up with her affairs despite his own indiscretions, divorced her in 1969. Though the flamboyant characters never lost touch, and 10 years after the divorce, the Playboy gave Bardot a diamond ring worth 1.2 million francs and famously said this about her: "A year with Bardot was worth 10 with anyone else." In 1968, Shalako, her second Hollywood attempt, ended in another box office disappointment. Although Bardot's music career took off, participating in several musical shows and recording many popular 1960s and 70s songs. Her next films between 1969 and 1970 also went relatively unnoticed. Her last few films were mostly comedies. In 1973, she reunited one more time with Vadim, filming Don Juan, or If Don Juan Were a Woman, in which Brigitte was given the part of a man. Brigitte stayed true to her word, in which she said the Vadim collaboration would not be her last. Her final film would be The Edifying and Joyous Story of Colonel, 1973. Shortly after, she would announce she was retiring before her 40th birthday as a way to get out elegantly. Politics and legal issues. In 1998, the Irish Times opened an article with, "Oh Brigitte, where did you go wrong? It takes a special talent for a living myth to knock herself off her own pedestal." Turning her back on film, Brigitte had begun using her animal rights activism as a springboard for controversial opinions. In a section of her 1996 book, Pluto Square, entitled Open Letter to My Lost France, Brigitte writes, "My country, France, my homeland. My land is again invaded by an overpopulation of foreigners, especially Muslims." In June 2000, Bardot was fined 30,000 francs by the French court for her comment. In 1997, Brigitte had already been fined for the original publication of this open letter, and again in 1998 for making similar remarks. In her 2003 book, A Scream in the Silence, she contrasted her gay friends with homosexuals who jiggle their bottoms, put their little fingers in the air, and with their little castrato voices moan about what those ghastly heteros put them through, and how some contemporary homosexuals behave like fairground freaks. Her defense, published in a French gay magazine, was, quote, "I am entirely surrounded by homos." Her second publication warned of an Islamic takeover and contains a section in which she attacks and displays her abhorrence for racial mixing and immigration, praising previous generations who have given their lives to push out invaders. In June 2004, the French court convicted Bardot a 4th time for inciting racial hatred, which she denied. "I never knowingly wanted to hurt anybody," she said in court. "It's not in my character." Yet Brigitte didn't stop. In 2008, she was once again convicted and fined €15,000 for inciting racial and/or religious hatred after she sent the former Interior Minister of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, a letter conveying her disdain for Muslims. She was, quote, "fed up with being under the thumb of this population which is destroying us, destroying our country, and imposing its habits." In 2021, 2 years after writing an open letter calling the residents of the Reunion Island degenerate savages, Brigitte was fined €20,000. Her 6th and hopefully final time for inciting racial hatred. In 2014, the European Jewish Congress released a statement about Bardot. She may well be concerned for the welfare of animals, but her long-standing support for the far right and for discrimination against minorities in France shows a constant disdain for human rights instead. Jacques, Brigitte's ex-husband, gave us a clue where she may have got her right-wing politics. The only things from her inheritance that she gave him were allegedly her father's books on Nazi leaders, Goebbels and Goering, and an autographed copy of Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. In 2018, Brigitte also dismissed claims from actresses in the Me Too movement, calling them hypocritical, ridiculous, and without interest. Lots of actresses, she said, will try to play the tease with producers to get a role and then say that they were harassed. I was never the victim. I found it charming when men told me that I was beautiful or had a nice little backside. Bardot's fourth marriage to businessman and former advisor to ex-leader of the National Front, Bernard Dormal, had the shortest courtship but proved to be her longest relationship. They met in July 1992 and married in August. Legacy. Reflecting on Brigitte's legacy is a strange one. On one hand, you have a lot of people defending her or excusing her behaviour, but there is nothing mild about Brigitte's views. And this isn't me not giving Brigitte a very fair assessment or a chance. Whilst Brigitte did make a televised appeal aiding and echoing Josephine Baker's pleas, this was some time ago and doesn't mean she can't say or do contradicting things. Serial biographer Marie-Dominique Lelieve believes that the extent of Brigitte's far-right sympathies can be overdone. Brigitte Bardot's husband is a friend of Jean-Marie Le Pen, but neither of them is a party member. Bardot is not a racist and not an extreme right activist, she says. According to her, any attempt to classify Bardot is futile. I'm not sure how much of that I agree with, as I think her belief of Bardot is Bardot and therefore she defies definition lets Brigitte off the hook too easily. This isn't to say there aren't merits to Brigitte. She has her place in pop culture as the first woman to have publicly displayed her sexual freedom, synonymous with the quintessential French woman, and has never avoided the cruel gaze of the mirror. Her lifestyle is admired by many, amounting to a philosophical manifesto. In terms of fashion, she has made her mark with popularizing the Bardot neckline, the bikini, which was still considered risque in the States. She brought her beehive hairstyle and gingham clothes into fashion after wearing a pink checkered dress at her wedding to Jacques. Her signature style has inspired millions of women to tease their hair or try out winged eyeliner since the last few decades. Since then, many models like Kate Moss and Claudia Schiffer have tried to emulate and were inspired by Bardot, but as she puts it, none have my personality. In 2020, Vogue named Bardot number 1 of the most beautiful French actresses of all time. And yes, she is gorgeous. But it would be wrong of me to not address or gloss over Brigitte's takes on social issues, especially when they feature so prominently in her life.